Hi, Charles of Sir Booksage here, and I have a question for all you booktubers. When you look at your book collection, do some of your books come with the memory of not so much the reading of the book for the first time, but the acquisition of it? Do you have that attachment or memories of your life of where and when you actually got any particular books? Because I was watching a video from the Bookish Porcupine that she uploaded today of how to find books, and I'll link that link below to it so you can watch that after this. And it really got me thinking and reminiscing and looking at my own book collection, because so many of you booktubers are very young and you've grown up in the internet age where everything's available at the click of a button. And I just wonder, I look at a lot of the books that I've owned for many decades that there's history attached to just acquiring the book itself. So I'm just going to highlight some of those books, just kind of spotlight a couple of books in my collection, and just briefly talk about the memory of getting them. Because it actually, when I look at some of these books, at the moment I pick the book up, it's not just enjoying the story that's contained within the pages, it comes with that sort of comfortable memory of even getting the book itself. And I wonder if that's kind of maybe not a lost experience, but a much rarer experience in today's, instant internet world. So when I was very young, I'm originally from New York City, but in elementary school, our family moved out to northern Jersey for those few years. And on the weekends, my mother would go to the mall, one of the big malls in New Jersey, and I would always tag along with her. It was just her and me. That was kind of our time together. With just the two of us was like on a Saturday or a Sunday, I can't remember which particular day it was, where she would spend a few hours kind of roaming around all the department stores, checking out clothes, all different things. And many of the times, but not all the time, but on occasion enough, we would stop in the bookstore. And I would get to go and look. And most of it was me looking to see what was out so I could point out to my mom what books I wanted her and my dad to get me for Christmas. But sometimes if I had my allowance money or we had extra money that time, my mother would let me pick out a paperback. And some of my earliest books that I own, these are the first 3 books of Andre Norton's Witch World series. And this is one of my favorite science fictions. Well, this is really, I consider science fantasy, because it's got elements of both that I've owned. I've owned these books. These are early 70s, like probably 72, 73, somewhere around there. I was young. I wasn't even 10 years old yet. And this is actually the first 3 books I own 17 books in this series. That's actually this whole front part of my shelf here, from here all the way over. That's the 17 Witch World books that I own. And I can look at those books, and the first few are from that mall in New Jersey. And then the next few are from a mall in Staten Island when I was in junior high school. And then a couple more are from a couple of other bookstores in the area in New York City when I was in high school and done with high school. So that's my entire, from kindergarten through graduating high school is contained right there in those 17 books. So those parts of my life are part of those books for me, those physical paperbacks. And I could go and buy another copy of any of these now, but that copy is not going to have the same physical connection and memory that those books have for me. And that's kind of what I started thinking about today. So I wanted to kind of do this video to spotlight a couple of these books and talk about that experience. We moved to Staten Island. They had the big Staten Island Mall, and we would take occasional trips out to that as well. Mostly it was family going there. There used to be this restaurant, I think it was Farrell's or something. That was a fun restaurant to go to. But that was when we lived in Tottenville, and when we lived in Great Kills, we could actually walk to the mall. And it was a bit of a hike. I mean, it was probably close to an hour to walk, but we did it. And one of the things I would do, most of my money went towards records, because I was in high school at that point, and music is such a huge part of your life when you're particularly in high school. But I still would stop at the bookstore, and most of the books I was still getting at that point, usually for my birthday or Christmas, were ones that I would just point out in the bookstore in the mall, and then my parents would end up getting at some point. But then right after that, we ended up in the Bronx for the last part of high school for me. And there were no bookstores when we first moved into our neighborhood. This is in the West Bronx. There weren't any bookstores there. So it was either travel into Manhattan or go up to the Cross County Mall in Yonkers. So I would take the number 1 bus around the reservoir up to Jerome Avenue, and then we'd get on the bus to the mall. So the trip was a good hour, sometimes hour and a half, depending upon traffic. And then it would walk across. It was like an open mall. And then over to the bookstore, which was in the back corner, which when it was in the winter, that was an extremely cold walk because you had the wind would just funnel down the sides of those low buildings, and it would just create like this wind tunnel. So yeah, that could get kind of brutal in the winter. But we went and we trudged up to the bookstore, and a lot of particularly my old Arthur C. Clarke book collection, my old Del Rey paperbacks from Arthur C. Clarke, come from that bookstore. So every time I pick these books up, they come with that memory of taking that ride, those couple of buses, and going up to that bookstore and walking, particularly in the winter, in that freezing cold wind, over to that bookstore to get some books. And one particular one comes from that bookstore is Dahlgren, which I've highlighted in one of my other videos. And this is one of my all-time favorite books. It's one of the greatest science fiction books ever written. And it's a kind of dystopian, post-apocalyptic book story. But this was from that same bookstore as well. And I remember I went specifically to find Samuel R. Delany books at that bookstore because I had just read Triton. I talked about this in my other video. But this was a journey where I took those multiple bus rides all the way up to Cross County Mall in Yonkers from the Bronx to specifically find Samuel R. Delany books. And this is what they had. Now, I also own, that I bought only a few years ago, a bigger trade paperback. This was a new edition put out by, I think, a library or a college. Oh yes, Wesleyan University Press, published by the University Press of New England, where they have, I guess, acquired some deal to reprint a lot of, particularly Samuel R. Delany's books. And I bought this because I wanted another copy. This one's much larger, easier, probably heavier, but easier to read. Now, this is a book I could donate without any thinking about it for people, like to a library or something. This one, I won't, because the memory of going and taking those bus rides and finding this book and opening it up in the bookstore and reading that first page and then buying it and then taking that bus ride back home, those 2 buses, and starting to read the book on the way home, that's part of this story for me. And this physical book, whenever I pick it up, it comes with that memory. This is the same exact story, same exact thing, but this doesn't have that memory. This I ordered online and got shipped to me. So there's no life experience for me attached to this physical copy. But this one has that unique memory that will always stay with me. And I wonder, particularly in today's internet age where you find most of your books online, let's say, and order them and they get shipped to you, I wonder, is that an experience that fewer people have these days? Because I guess one of the conveniences of technology is you don't have to take multiple bus rides to go to a small little bookstore in an open mall in the middle of winter to find a book. And while it's easy to love, that convenience to just order it online and have it sent to you is awesome, and I love it. And most of my more recent purchases are either on ebook, where it's instant, or it's sent to you by Amazon or somebody. But there'll always be a special place in my book collection for books like this that it's just enriches the experience for me for some reason. And the other bookstore finally opened up in the Bronx, up in Riverdale Avenue. So then I didn't have to go and take those multiple bus rides anymore. I could just walk up all those city steps at the foot of 238th Street and then all the way up the hill. And I got these there. I have a lot of the Catherine Kurtz Durini novels, which are really cool fantasy series. And these first three I bought at that bookstore. I think it was a Paperback Booksmith up there on Riverdale Avenue in the Bronx. And interestingly enough, most of my fantasy paperbacks from the 80s were purchased at the Booksmith store on Riverdale Avenue in the Bronx. And most of my science fiction paperbacks from the 80s I got at the bookstore in the Cross County Mall in Yonkers. Not really sure why it worked out that way, but I don't know if maybe this one had just a larger fantasy and a smaller science fiction section, and this one had the larger science fiction section, or it just happened to work out that way. I don't really know. And just a couple of other quick experiences. This book here, A Complete Guide to Heraldry, I stumbled across in a used bookstore. I think it was Pyramid Books in Midtown Manhattan, which I don't know if that bookstore even exists anymore. This is a cool little book. This is actually, if you want to know all about heraldry, this book is it. It goes into very specific detail. And because heraldry has its own language, where everything's described in a language basically seemingly created for heraldry itself. And it breaks it down, and there's monsters, there's birds, and it goes through all the different types where you can, all the different ways even the same bird can be displayed. And it's really, really cool books. Someone who likes to write fantasy and read fantasy, particularly medieval fantasy, having this book and reading and understanding just the heraldic symbols themselves and what they mean and why people adopted them, and just the whole language around heraldry itself is really quite fascinating. And again, this was tucked in a back shelf in the back of Pyramid. Otherwise, I would have never even known this book existed. And I always have that memory of just wandering around. I think it was on the way to a different store on the west side, a big model store, because we used to collect like model airplanes and model boats and things. And I wandered past this, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go in there instead. And this is what I got. And then in the mid-90s, I was living in Jersey briefly again. And my girlfriend and I were headed to Princeton to meet up with some friends for dinner at a restaurant there. And we parked our car on the outskirts, and then we walked to the restaurant because there was no parking where the restaurant was. And because wherever we parked and the route we decided to walk to the restaurant, we came around the corner, and there, tucked in the side, was a basement bookstore in this old building. And I was like, oh, got to go in there before we go to dinner. So I went down, and there they had this Sir Walter Scott's Rob Roy. It's just $6 sitting on the shelf. And my father's mother's side, they're all from Scotland. So Rob Roy's always been a fascinating character in Scottish history for me. So again, this book, it's just Rob Roy story. And apparently it was owned by a William Kowalkowski, who apparently printed his name in all the books he owned, my guess is. But this book comes with that memory of that dinner in Princeton and walking around Princeton, which is in and of itself, Princeton's a really cool place to go. I mean, this is where Albert Einstein was roaming around the same streets. But this kind of just got me thinking about and wanted to do this video. And like I said, how many people don't have these kind of experiences attached to their books? Maybe you do. I mean, I have no idea. But I was just, the Bookish Porcupine's video kind of got me thinking about it and how really important it is. This is I can look back at that book and know where I was and what I was thinking and what I was feeling just as a person at that time in my life. And that's one of my favorite things about physical books, even though most of my reading is done on ebook these days. But there's that uniqueness that comes with owning the physical book. And for me, part of that uniqueness is that journey of discovery of the book itself, and that memory of taking that trip and finding it and acquiring it and starting to read it on the way home. And that memory does not exist so much here. Obviously, I'll know it will remind me of this book, but this is the book that comes with that physical journey itself, is attached for some reason to this physical copy, but not this one, even though it's the same exact book. So I just want to know from all of you booktubers, do you have these kinds of life experiences that stay with the book you purchase, that are kind of independent in a way of the actual reading of the book? Because, I mean, the reading of the book is a whole other part of everyone's life, and everyone gets to experience that, where you remember perhaps your time and place in your life of when you first read that book. But my question is, do you have that experience of the journey to find the physical book itself? And I just wonder, does that exist as much anymore in today's instant internet world? So that's just wanted to kind of talk about it, highlight a couple of the books in my collection, plus kind of work these thoughts through my head here in a live sort of video. And hopefully didn't sound like an incoherent idiot, but it's just kind of something I'm thinking about. As you know, I see so many booktubers, so many of you are so young, and I think back to my time at your age and what I went through, the journeys we had to take just to get a book. Because there was no internet to just go and click and order and have it sent. A couple of my Tolkien books, I actually called up Houghton Mifflin, the publisher themselves, and asked them, did they have any copies of this book left in their warehouse? And they did, and they sold them to me and shipped them to me. So even that, which is a book I ordered by calling the publisher over the phone, those couple of volumes in that 12-volume series, they have that memory of, I got that because I just decided to call the publisher and see if they had one. And I got lucky and they did. Otherwise, my collection wouldn't be, it's mostly complete. I have all 12 books, but I have to find the first book I have only in a book club edition. I've got to get the original first edition of the first one, and then that'll be a complete set. But even that one series alone, the Histories of Middle-earth, I'll probably put a picture of it here from my phone. Some of those books I got in the bookstore in the mall. The whole middle section, most of those came from calling the publisher and then selling it to me for just a few bucks each. And they were happy to move the inventory sitting in their shelf. And then most of the rest of them came from the Scribner's bookstore, which was just, like I mentioned, just a fantastic bookstore that sadly no longer exists in New York City. Before I keep rambling on and now starting to repeat myself, I'm going to cut my video short here, but I just want to hear from all of you booktubers out there, if you have that experience and which particular books bring those memories of the journey of the discovery of the book itself, be separate from reading it. And I guess that's it. And I wanted to thank the Bookish Porcupine for her video, which kind of sparked my mind and started going down this road. Again, I'll link to her video below. Until I talk to you next time, this is Charles with Sir Booksage, and happy reading.